The crystal glass felt cold and heavy in Richard Vance's hand. He held it aloft, the champagne within catching the light of the dining room's ostentatious chandelier, each facet of the fixture a testament to his own perceived brilliance. The table, a long slash of polished mahogany, was laden with the remains of a feast, a celebration of the Vance family's latest triumph, a lucrative merger that would cement their status among the city's new money elite. "To the future," Richard boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. His face was florid with wine and self-satisfaction. "To the Vance name, a name that, from this day forward, will be synonymous not just with success, but with dominance." His wife Eleanor, a woman sculpted from ice and ambition, raised her glass with a thin, approving smile. Their son Julian, already a caricature of a ruthless finance bro at 26, smirked and tapped his glass with a signet ring. And Richard's daughter Clara, Liam's wife, beamed at her father, her eyes shining with reflected glory. Liam, seated at the far end of the table, felt the familiar weight of his own invisibility. He was a ghost at their feast, a necessary but unacknowledged presence, like a piece of furniture they had forgotten to put in storage. Julian's gaze slid down the table to Liam, a familiar predatory glint in his eyes. "And to Liam," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, for making sure Clara gets home safe. Every empire needs its loyal foot soldiers, right?" The laughter was light but sharp, a series of cuts that Liam had long grown accustomed to. He offered a small, non-committal smile, a shield he had perfected over 3 years of marriage. He could feel the heavy, ornate key in his pocket, its familiar edges a silent comfort against his palm. He had carried it every day since his grandfather passed. Clara, caught up in the intoxicating tide of her family's arrogance, turned to him. The adoration she had for her father curdled into something dismissive when it reached her husband. "Oh, leave him be, Julian. It's not his fault he doesn't understand these things. His family, well, they're simple people. They wouldn't know the first thing about building a legacy." Richard chuckled. "Simple is one word for it. Good, honest folk, I'm sure. But you can't build an empire on honesty alone, can you, Liam? What was it your father did again? A school teacher?" "He was a professor of history," Liam corrected softly, his voice even. "History," Richard barked a laugh. "People who study the past. We Vances, we create the future." The final, most devastating blow came from Clara. She waved a dismissive hand, as if shooing away an unpleasant thought. "It doesn't matter. We're Vances now. That's what's important. Liam's family, with all due respect," she said, the words a mockery of the sentiment, "are a line of nobodies. Sweet, but ultimately worthless in the grand scheme of things. Their name doesn't open any doors." The word hung in the air. Worthless. It was not the insult itself that struck Liam, but the casual, unthinking cruelty with which his own wife had delivered it. She had looked right through him, seeing not the man she had once promised to love and cherish, but a disappointing accessory that didn't match her family's new, glittering life. He saw the satisfaction in Eleanor's eyes, the smug approval on Julian's face. They had won. They had finally severed Clara from any lingering loyalty to him, absorbing her completely into their cold, shiny world. Liam's expression did not change. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. His fingers tightened around the old brass key in his pocket. Clara and her family thought they were celebrating the beginning of an empire. They had no idea that her single, careless word was not a beginning, but an ending. Within a month, the name Vance would indeed be synonymous with something, not dominance, but disgrace. And the name she had just dismissed as worthless would be the one to seal their fate. They were so busy creating their future, they never thought to look into his past. And so it began. Not with a shout, but with a quiet click in Liam's mind, the sound of a lock turning, a door swinging open onto a path of meticulous, unavoidable justice. For those of you watching, Have you ever been made to feel small by people who thought they were big? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, settle in, because what the Vances didn't know was that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And the key was already in Liam's hand. The humiliation had been a slow drip poison, administered in carefully measured doses over the years. Liam remembered the wedding planning with a clarity that still felt sharp. He and Clara had been happy then, insulated in the bubble of their own world. But the moment her family became involved, the bubble burst. Eleanor had taken one look at the guest list Liam had proposed for his side, a collection of university professors, artists, librarians, and childhood friends from his quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, and her lip had curled in a faint, yet unmistakable sneer. 150 guests, Clara, darling, she had murmured, scanning the list as if it were a list of contaminants. And not a single name I recognize. No industry leaders? No one from the club? Are we quite sure about all of these? The implication was clear. His people were not their people. They were a liability to the image she was trying to project. Clara, eager to please, had gently suggested they trim the list to make it more manageable. Liam, wanting to avoid a fight, had acquiesced, watching as the names of people who had shaped his life were quietly crossed out, replaced by business associates of his father-in-law, whom Clara had never even met. On his wedding day, he had been surrounded by strangers, a guest at his own life's milestone. Then came their first Christmas as a married couple. The Vance family's gift exchange was a competitive sport in ostentatious spending. Julian received a Rolex, Eleanor a diamond bracelet, Richard a first-edition book signed by a titan of industry. Liam, who had spent weeks in his small workshop crafting a beautiful, intricate wooden box, its joints seamless, its surface polished to a satin sheen, presented it to Richard. Inside was a collection of restored antique map-making tools, a nod to Richard's professed love of conquering new territory in business. Richard had opened it, stared at the contents with blank confusion, and then let out a polite, hollow laugh. Well, well, how quaint. Thank you, son. Very crafty. He had set it aside without a second glance, the handmade object looking small and out of place amidst the glossy designer boxes. Their gift to Liam, presented by Eleanor with the air of a grand lady bestowing charity, was a leather-bound copy of a best-selling book, The Alpha Mindset: How to Dominate in the Boardroom and in Life. We thought this might be inspiring for you, dear, she had said, her voice smooth as silk, to help you find your footing. Clara had squeezed his hand under the table, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like an apology. At that moment, she still knew it was wrong. She still saw the insult, but she said nothing. Her silence was the fertile ground in which her family's contempt took root. Over the years, her silence grew into complicity. Dinners became tribunals where Liam's career choices were cross-examined. He'd left a large, prestigious architectural firm to join a smaller, boutique practice. To the Vances, this was an act of professional suicide, a retreat from ambition. I don't get it, Richard had said one evening, swirling brandy in a snifter. You were on the partner track at Beaumont and Sons, a real firm. Now you're at, what's it called? Atelier Gray? Sounds like a dress shop. How are you ever going to provide for my daughter drawing up plans for someone's kitchen extension? We focus on historical preservation and sustainable design, Liam had explained calmly. It's meaningful work. Meaningful doesn't pay for a mortgage on a house in this neighborhood, Richard had shot back. Clara, who once would have defended his passion, now just looked away, a flicker of embarrassment on her face. She had started to see him through their eyes, a man of modest means and even more modest ambitions. A disappointment. He remembered the exact moment he realized he had lost her. They were at a gallery opening, and a prominent developer, a friend of her father's, had clapped Liam on the shoulder and asked, "So, You're the architect in the family? Richard tells me you do renovations. Let me know if my wife needs a new powder room designed, eh? The man had laughed and walked away. Liam had looked at Clara, expecting to share a moment of exasperated solidarity. Instead, he saw her blushing, humiliated not by the man's rudeness, but by the perceived truth in his words. From that day on, she began to parrot her family's lines. His meaningful work became your little projects. His quiet nature became a lack of drive. His contentment with a simpler, less ostentatious life became a failure to launch. Each comment was a small betrayal, an erosion of the foundation they had built. He never fought back. He never raised his voice. He simply absorbed the insults with a preternatural calm that the Vances mistook for weakness, for defeat. They didn't understand that his patience was not passive. It was a vessel. And with every slight, every condescending remark, every moment of casual cruelty, it filled. He was waiting. He was observing. He was documenting. In his mind, he kept a meticulous ledger of grievances, not for revenge, but for clarity. He had to be sure. He had to know, beyond any doubt, that what he was about to do was not just justified, but necessary. The dinner where Clara called his family worthless was simply the final entry in that long, painful ledger. It was the moment the vessel became full. And as he sat there, feeling the cold weight of the key in his hand, he knew that the time for patience was over. The time for action had arrived. In the days following the disastrous dinner, a manic energy pulsed through the Vance household. Their victory in the merger had inflated their already prodigious egos to stratospheric levels. They saw themselves as modern-day royalty, and they were preparing for their coronation, the official launch of the Vance Family Charitable Foundation. It was, of course, a vanity project of the highest order, a tax-deductible vehicle for laundering their public image. The foundation wasn't about giving back. It was about being seen giving back. It was a performance, and the Vances were its stars, directors, and producers. Liam watched the preparations with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist studying a strange tribe. The dining room table was now buried under seating charts, floral swatches, and catering menus. The air buzzed with frantic phone calls about press coverage and guest lists. Eleanor was in her element, ruthlessly curating the evening, ensuring that every detail screamed wealth, power, and impeccable taste. Julian was tasked with schmoozing potential donors, promising them proximity to the Vance's ascending star. Richard rehearsed his keynote speech, a bombastic ode to his own brilliance, in front of every available mirror. And Liam? Liam was the help. Liam, be a dear and run these invitations over to the calligrapher, Eleanor would command without looking up from her charts. Hey pal, my tux needs picking up from the tailor. Mind grabbing it on your way home from wherever it is you go? Julian would ask, tossing a set of keys onto the table. Clara was the worst. Utterly consumed by the spectacle, she treated him less like a husband and more like a personal assistant. Liam, did you confirm the valet service? I can't have guests parking their own Bentleys for God's sake. And I need you to go to 3 different bakeries to sample cakes for the dessert buffet. Get receipts for everything. My father will expense it. She moved through their home, a whirlwind of ambition, oblivious to the chasm that had opened between them. She didn't see the stillness in his eyes, the profound and unnerving calm that had settled over him since that night. She mistook his quiet obedience for resignation. One afternoon, Liam sat in the living room, ostensibly reading a book on architectural theory, while the family held a war council around him. The mayor has confirmed, Eleanor announced, triumphant. He'll make a few remarks. I've got Henderson from the Chronicle to do a full-page feature, Julian added, puffing out his chest. He owes me one. And I, Richard declared, pausing for dramatic effect, will announce our inaugural pledge, a $1 million donation to kick things off. We'll be the talk of the town, the Carnegies of our generation. Clara clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, Daddy, it's perfect. We'll be titans." She glanced over at Liam, who hadn't moved, his eyes on his book. An expression of irritation crossed her face. "Liam, are you even listening? This is important." He looked up, his expression placid. "It sounds like a wonderful evening." "A wonderful evening?" Julian scoffed. "This is a legacy, Liam. This is history being made. But I guess you'd know all about history, wouldn't you? The kind that stays in dusty books." Liam closed his book, the sound a soft thud in the suddenly quiet room. "Some books aren't dusty, Julian," he said, his voice level. He stood up. "If you'll excuse me, I have a phone call to make." He walked into his study, the small, book-lined room that the Vances regarded as his sad little hobbit hole. He closed the door, the sound shutting out the frantic energy of the house. He sat behind his simple oak desk and pulled out his phone. He didn't hesitate. He scrolled to a name listed simply as Alistair and pressed the call button. The voice that answered was old but crisp, sharp as a shard of glass. "Alistair Finch." "Alistair, it's Liam. Liam Sterling." There was a pause, and then the voice warmed considerably. "Liam, my boy, it's good to hear your voice. Is everything all right?" "Everything is as it should be," Liam replied, his gaze falling on a framed photograph on his desk. It was of an old man with kind eyes and a strong jaw, standing on a windswept hill, his grandfather. "The Vance family is hosting a gala for their new foundation in 2 weeks, at the Grand Imperial Ballroom." "A gala? How ambitious of them," Alistair said, a note of dry amusement in his tone. "They're billing it as the philanthropic event of the season," Liam continued. "I need you to do something for me. I'm sending you the invitation. I'd like you and the other board members to attend." "The board of the Sterling Foundation at a Vance event? Liam, are you sure? It's not exactly our usual crowd." "I'm sure," Liam said, his voice firm. "Please just be there. And Alistair, I think it's time. The arrangements we discussed, the contingency plans, I'd like you to put them in motion." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Liam could picture the old lawyer, sitting in his leather chair, surrounded by law books and the weight of a century-old legacy. When Alistair finally spoke, his voice was grave, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded like satisfaction. "Very well, Liam. Your grandfather always said you had a spine of steel. He said you'd know when the time was right. I'll make the necessary calls. The contingency plans will be activated. We'll see you at the gala." Liam hung up the phone. He felt no anger, no glee, no thirst for revenge. He felt only a profound sense of gravity, the feeling of a great wheel beginning to turn. The Vances were busy building a stage for their own glory. They had no idea they were actually building it for their own judgment, and the curtain was about to rise. The night of the Vance Family Charitable Foundation launch was a symphony of excess. The Grand Imperial Ballroom had been transformed into a glittering forest of white orchids and shimmering crystal. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a tasteful veneer over the raw hum of ambition that filled the room. The city's elite had turned out in force, a preening flock of peacocks drawn to the promise of power and publicity. They drifted through the opulent space, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter brittle and their smiles calculated. At the center of it all stood the Vances, radiant in their self-appointed glory. Richard, puffed up in his bespoke tuxedo, greeted guests with a booming laugh and a firm handshake, a king holding court. Eleanor, a vision in icy silver, glided through the crowd, bestowing air kisses and appraising glances. Julian, slick and predatory, worked the room like a shark, sniffing out money and influence. And Clara was incandescent. She wore a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, a stark and stunning statement. She was the living embodiment of her family's triumph, her face flushed with excitement, her eyes sparkling with the reflection of 1,000 camera flashes. She had achieved everything she had ever wanted: status, admiration, envy. Liam stood slightly behind her, a shadow in her blazing light. He wore a simple, dark suit. It was exquisitely tailored, cut from a fabric that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it, a quiet statement of quality that was lost on the Vances. To them, it was just dark, understated, safe. Honestly, Liam, Clara had hissed at him as they'd stepped out of the car, couldn't you have tried a little harder? You look like you're here to fix the lighting. She hadn't waited for a response, immediately swept up by the first wave of photographers. Now he watched her. He watched her bask in the adulation, watched her laugh at a developer's terrible joke, watched her touch her father's arm with filial pride. There was no trace of the woman he had married, the one who loved rainy Sundays and old bookstores and the quiet satisfaction of his architectural sketches. She had been replaced by this dazzling, brittle creature, a perfect product of the Vance dynasty. He felt a profound sense of detachment, as if he were watching a play for which he already knew the ending. He was a study in stillness amidst the frantic motion. His posture was relaxed, his hands loosely clasped behind his back. His gaze, however, was sharp, missing nothing. He noted the desperate hunger in a young banker's eyes as he cornered Richard. He saw the flash of genuine contempt in an old-money matriarch's smile as she complimented Eleanor on the charming decor. He saw the intricate, invisible web of transactions, social, financial, and emotional, that held this world together. A few times his eyes met those of other guests across the room. An elderly woman with a famously philanthropic name, a quiet, distinguished man known for sitting on the boards of half the city's cultural institutions, a stern-faced gentleman who was the senior partner at the city's most respected law firm. They were not the flashiest people in the room, not the loudest. They were, in fact, almost as invisible as Liam himself. But when they saw him, their expressions shifted. A brief, almost imperceptible nod, a small, respectful smile, a look of profound understanding. These were Alistair's people. The board, Clara, standing beside him, chattering about the canapes, noticed nothing. The air grew thick with anticipation as the time for the speeches approached. The quiet before the storm. The low murmur of the crowd was a physical presence, a vibration of collective ego. Liam took a slow, deep breath, the scent of orchids and expensive perfume filling his lungs. He felt the weight of the key in his pocket, a cold, solid anchor in a sea of illusion. He was not nervous. He was not angry. He felt only a calm, solemn readiness. The Vances believed this night was about them, about their money, their power, their name. They were about to learn that the evening, the city, and the very ground beneath their feet had always been about something else entirely. It had always been about a legacy they were too blind to see, and a man they were too arrogant to know. The quartet finished its piece, and a hush fell over the room. It was time. Richard Vance, beaming, was walking toward the stage. Richard strode to the lectern, his chest puffed out like a pouter pigeon. He tapped the microphone, and the resulting thud echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. He basked in the attention, a broad, proprietary smile spreading across his face. This was his moment, the culmination of a lifetime of aggressive ambition. "Friends, colleagues, fellow visionaries," he began, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. "Welcome, welcome to the dawn of a new era of philanthropy in our great city. An era led by a new name, the Vance name." A polite but enthusiastic round of applause rippled through the room. Clara, seated at the head table, looked at her father with pure adoration. Eleanor's smile was one of supreme, icy triumph. "For too long," Richard continued, his tone turning grave and important, "charity in this city has been the domain of old names, of dusty legacies. But the future is not built by looking to the past. It is built by bold action, by decisive leadership. It is built by people like us, people who make things happen." Liam, seated at a less prominent table near the back, listened without expression. He felt a quiet pity for the man. Richard was so enamored with the sound of his own voice that he was deaf to the irony of his words. And tonight, the Vance Family Charitable Foundation will begin its work with a bold action of our own. We are proud to announce our inaugural pledge, $1 million. He paused, letting the number hang in the air. A wave of appreciative murmurs swept the crowd. $1 million to revitalize one of our city's forgotten jewels, an institution that has languished, waiting for a new generation of leadership to restore its former glory. We are pledging these funds to the Northwood Conservatory. He beamed, expecting a roar of approval. Instead, there was a moment of confused silence, followed by scattered, uncertain applause. A few people exchanged puzzled glances. From his table, Liam watched the confusion ripple outwards. Richard, slightly flustered by the lukewarm response, pressed on. This wonderful institution, founded over a century ago by a group of anonymous merchants, will once again become the heart of our city's artistic life, thanks to Vance's generosity. This was the moment, the flaw in the facade, the crack in the marble. A voice, calm but carrying with absolute clarity, cut through the quiet aftermath of the speech. It's pronounced Norwood. Every head turned. The voice had come from the back of the room, from the table where Clara's quiet, unassuming husband sat. Liam was looking directly at the stage, his expression unreadable. Richard squinted, momentarily blinded by the stage lights. What was that? Liam's voice was stronger this time, imbued with an effortless authority that startled everyone, most of all his wife. It's Norwood. The th is silent, and it wasn't founded by anonymous merchants. It was founded in 1928 by a single benefactor. He paused, letting the silence stretch, drawing every ounce of attention in the room toward him. Then he delivered the name. It was founded by Arthur Sterling. A shockwave went through the room. The older, more established guests stiffened. The name Arthur Sterling was not just a name, it was a cornerstone. It was woven into the very fabric of the city's cultural and civic life. Richard looked utterly bewildered. Arthur who? Clara was mortified. She shot Liam a look of pure fury, her face flushing a shade that clashed violently with her crimson dress. Liam, what in God's name are you doing? She hissed, her voice a low, frantic whisper. Sit down. You're embarrassing me. Julian, ever the smug antagonist, let out a loud, derisive snort. Yeah, Liam, who the hell is Arthur Sterling? Another one of your worthless relatives? The word, his own careless insult thrown back at him, hung in the air. It was the perfect cue. Liam didn't even glance at Julian. He kept his eyes fixed on Richard, on stage, a man suddenly looking very small and very lost. This was no longer a party. It was a reckoning. And Liam Sterling, the quiet architect, the ghost at the feast, was now at its center. Clara's embarrassment curdled into a hot, defensive anger. How dare he? How dare he ruin their night, her father's moment, with this bizarre, irrelevant outburst? She would put an end to this nonsense herself. She would prove, right here and now, how utterly insignificant this name was. With trembling, furious fingers, she pulled out her $1,000 smartphone, its screen a stark white light in the dim ballroom. I'll show you how irrelevant this name is, she muttered to herself, her thumb jabbing at the search bar. She typed in the words, Arthur Sterling plus Norwood Conservatoire. She hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the results began to load, and Clara's world tilted on its axis. Her face went blank. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a sickly, pale mask. Her perfectly glossed lips parted slightly in disbelief. The phone trembled in her hand. It wasn't a lack of results that shocked her. It was the flood. Article after article, archival photographs, building dedications, university wings, hospital libraries, museum collections, the Sterling Foundation, the Sterling Endowment for the Arts, the Sterling Prize for Civic Architecture. Arthur Sterling wasn't a forgotten benefactor, he was a legend. A quiet industrialist and philanthropist on a scale that dwarfed her father's ambitions. A man who had anonymously shaped the city for half a century. His name wasn't just on the conservatoire, it was etched, literally and figuratively, into the foundations of every venerable institution the Vances so desperately wished to impress. And at the top of the search results, a black and white photograph of a man with kind eyes and a strong jaw, standing on the steps of the newly opened conservatoire in 1928. It was the same man from the photograph on Liam's desk. Liam stood up. He didn't have to raise his voice. The room was so silent, his words fell like stones into a deep well. "My grandfather," he said, the two words landing with the force of a physical blow. "Arthur Sterling was my grandfather." He turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping over the Vances at the head table, who were now frozen like statues in a tableau of horror. He began the list of grievances, his voice calm, methodical, and utterly devastating. He looked directly at Richard, who was still standing at the lectern, his face a mess of confusion and dawning dread. "Richard, you asked me once what my family ever built. You're standing in it. The Sterling Group built this hotel. They built the tower your new offices are in. My grandfather believed in building things that last, things of quality and substance. He taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by how loudly they announce their arrival, but by the legacy of integrity they leave behind." His gaze shifted to Eleanor, whose icy composure had finally shattered, her face a mask of disbelief. "Eleanor, you always lamented my family's lack of taste. You were admiring the Renoir in the west wing of the museum last month. That is part of the Sterling collection, donated in 1968. My grandmother, a woman who grew up on a farm, personally curated it. She believed art was for everyone, not just for those who could afford to hang it on their walls." He then turned to Julian, who for the first time in his life looked small, his smug smirk wiped clean from his face. "Julian, you call my work on historical buildings dusty, the very historical preservation codes you complain about, the ones that protect the character of this city, were drafted and championed by my grandfather's foundation. He thought the past was something to learn from, not bulldoze." Finally, his eyes landed on Clara, his wife. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a terrifying, world-altering understanding. She was looking at him as if for the first time. "And you, Clara," he said, his voice softening, which was somehow more terrible than his anger. "You called my family, my legacy, my grandfather, worthless." He let the word hang in the silent air for a heart-stopping moment. "You said his name opened no doors." As if on cue, the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Framed in the doorway stood Alistair Finch, his silver hair immaculate, his posture ramrod straight despite his 80 years. He was flanked by the same quiet, distinguished guests Liam had acknowledged earlier, the board of the Sterling Foundation. They moved into the room not with the flashiness of the Vances, but with the quiet, unshakable gravity of true power. Alistair walked directly to the stage, taking a second microphone from a stunned event coordinator. He stood beside the paralyzed Richard Vance, a stark contrast of old-world substance and new-money bluster. "Good evening," Alistair said, his crisp, authoritative voice commanding the attention of every person in the room. "My name is Alistair Finch. I am the chairman of the Sterling Foundation and the executor of the Sterling Estate. On behalf of our entire board, I would like to thank the Vance family for gathering so many of our city's leaders here tonight. It gives us the perfect opportunity to make an announcement." The air crackled. The Vances looked like they were facing a firing squad. Liam stood, calm and resolute, the quiet center of the storm he had unleashed. The aftermath was not an explosion, but a swift, silent, and total collapse. Alistair Finch, with the calm precision of a surgeon, dismantled the Vance empire in under 5 minutes. The Sterling Foundation, he announced, his voice devoid of emotion, is the primary landowner of the new financial district, including the plot where Vance Holdings is currently constructing its new headquarters. A gasp went through the room. Richard looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Our leases contain, as all our contracts do, a standard morals and reputational clause. This clause is invoked when a lessee's actions bring disrepute upon the city's civic heritage or upon the legacy of our founder. He paused, letting the implication sink in. Publicly insulting the founder's direct heir and grandson, Liam Sterling, at a highly publicized event certainly qualifies. Therefore, as of this moment, we are exercising our right to terminate the lease with Vance Holdings, effective immediately. It was a death sentence. Their entire merger, the source of their celebration, was predicated on that new headquarters. Without the land, the deal would unravel. But Alistair wasn't finished. He gestured toward the stage, where the Vance Family Charitable Foundation banner hung like a funeral shroud. Furthermore, the Sterling Foundation is deeply moved by the generosity displayed here tonight. We would be honored to match every single pledge made to the Vance Foundation. A flicker of desperate hope appeared in Richard's eyes. Alistair extinguished it instantly. We will match those pledges and donate the total sum not to this new endeavor, but directly to the Northwood Conservatoire, in the name of its founder, Arthur Sterling, and in honor of his grandson's continued commitment to his legacy. He had not just ruined them, he had hijacked their entire event, co-opting their vanity and turning it into a tribute to the very man they had mocked. The press, who had come to document a coronation, were now gleefully documenting an execution. Camera flashes illuminated the Vances' faces, capturing not triumph, but pure, unadulterated horror. Richard was sputtering, his face a dangerous shade of purple. Eleanor looked like her ice sculpture facade had melted, leaving a puddle of panic. Julian, the finance bro who thought he knew every angle, was staring into the abyss of his own sudden irrelevance. And Clara ran. She stumbled from the head table, her crimson gown a slash of blood against the pale decor, and rushed toward Liam. She grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. "Liam, Liam, please, you have to stop this." Her voice was a ragged plea. Tell them it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know." Liam looked down at her, at the woman who had shared his bed, his life, his heart. His eyes were not filled with triumph or vengeance. They were filled with a vast, weary sadness. He saw in that moment the true poverty of her soul, a void that no amount of money or status could ever fill. "Didn't you, Clara?" he asked, his voice so quiet only she could hear it. "Or did you just not care to know?" "I'm your wife," she cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. He looked at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. His voice was gentle, but the words were blades. "Yes, you are. And in 3 years, you never once asked me about the photograph on my desk. You never showed the slightest curiosity about the man I was named after. You never wanted to know about my family, my history, my past. You only cared about my future, and whether it was big enough and shiny enough to match yours." He gently removed her hand from his arm. "The problem, Clara, was never that you didn't know who my grandfather was. The problem was that you didn't care to know who I was." She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. She had built her entire world on a foundation of surfaces and appearances. And she had just discovered, too late, that her husband was a man of substance, and she had shattered her world against him. The weeks that followed were a brutal education in the physics of social gravity. The Vances didn't just fall from grace, they plummeted. The collapse of the headquarters deal triggered a domino effect. The merger fell apart in a storm of lawsuits and recriminations. The bank called in their loans. Their fair-weather friends, the ones who had flocked to their gala, now crossed the street to avoid them. The Vance name, which Richard had boasted would be synonymous with dominance, became a punchline in the city's exclusive clubs, a cautionary tale about arrogance and ignorance. Liam watched it all from a distance. He had moved out of the grand, sterile house he had shared with Clara and into a quiet apartment overlooking the park, a space filled with books, light, and the welcome silence of his own thoughts. He had instructed Alistair to be ruthless in business, but merciful in practice. The Vances would not be left destitute, that was not the Sterling way, but they would be stripped of the excessive wealth that had so defined and corrupted them. Their empire was dismantled, their pride shattered. The grand Vance mansion, the stage for so many of Liam's humiliations, became a gilded cage. Liam heard through mutual acquaintances that the house was a tomb of silent resentment. Richard, a deflated balloon of a man, spent his days on the phone, shouting at lawyers and bankers, his rage a futile defense against the consequences of his own hubris. Eleanor, stripped of her social standing, reportedly wandered the empty rooms, weeping not for what was lost between people, but for the invitations that would never again arrive, the galas she would never again attend. Julian had lost his high-flying job and was humbled in a way that his swagger could no longer conceal. Clara, however, was the one who sought him out. She tried everything. First, it was rage. She left him furious voicemails, accusing him of being a liar, a monster, for hiding his identity from her. "You deceived me. You let me make a fool of myself," she'd screamed. Then came the apologies, dozens of them, delivered via text messages late at night. "I'm so sorry, Liam. I was a fool. I was blind. I love you. Please, let's fix this." Then came the begging. She showed up at his new apartment unannounced, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She had lost weight. The brittle, dazzling confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out fragility. "I'll do anything, Liam," she'd pleaded, standing in his doorway. "We can start over. I'll get to know your family, your history. I'll learn. I promise, I'll be different." He finally agreed to meet her, not at his home or hers, but in a neutral space, a minimalist coffee shop with wide windows and simple wooden tables. He watched her walk in, a woman untethered from the world she had known. She looked smaller, diminished. She began to talk, a torrent of excuses, justifications, and self-recrimination. It was her parents' fault, the pressure, the world they lived in. She was just trying to keep up. Liam listened patiently, sipping his black coffee. When she finally ran out of words, her shoulders slumped in defeat, he spoke. "It was never about the money, Clara," he said, his voice calm and even. "It was never about the Sterling name. I would have lived my whole life as Liam the Quiet Architect, and I would have been happy. The only thing I ever wanted from you was respect, kindness, the belief that the person you chose to marry had value, inherent value, separate from his bank account or his family tree." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you remember our second anniversary? I designed a small lakeside cabin for us. I spent months on the blueprints, a place just for us, away from everything. When I showed them to you, you glanced at them and said, 'That's nice, honey, but your father's offered us his condo in Aspen for the winter.' You never asked about the cabin again." Clara flinched, the memory a clear and painful one. "That's when I knew," Liam continued softly, "that's when I knew that the life I wanted to build was not a life you were interested in living. My legacy wasn't grand enough for you. The irony is, you were so busy chasing a legacy, you failed to see you were married to one." Later that week, Liam received an unexpected call from Richard Vance. The man's voice was different, stripped of its usual bombast. It was thin, tired. I just wanted to say," Richard stumbled over the words, the act of apology foreign to his tongue. "You were a better man than we ever gave you credit for. A better man for my daughter than I was a father. I saw it, I knew it, and I let them. I let my wife and my daughter walk all over you because I was a damn fool, proud of all the wrong things. He took a shaky breath. This is on me, all of it. I just wanted you to know that. It wasn't a full redemption. It was a crack of light in a dark room. It was a man, stripped of everything he valued, finally seeing the value in what he had thrown away. For Liam, it was a quiet, sad confirmation. He had done the right thing. 6 months passed. The city's seasons turned, washing away the memory of the Vances' spectacular implosion. For Liam, it was a season of quiet, purposeful construction. He was standing on a muddy plot of land on the industrial outskirts of the city, a place the Vances would have considered a wasteland. Around him, the foundations of a new building were being laid. It wasn't a glittering skyscraper or a luxury hotel. It was a community, an affordable housing project funded entirely by the Sterling Foundation, but designed by Liam with the same care and elegance he would have given a palace. The design was innovative, sustainable, and beautiful, built on the principle that dignity was not a luxury. He was in his element, a blueprint unfurled on the hood of his truck, discussing a structural detail with his foreman. He wore work boots, jeans, and a simple flannel shirt. His face, which had often seemed tense and guarded in the Vances' world, was now open and relaxed. He was respected here, not for his name, which few on the site knew, but for his vision, his skill, and his quiet authority. He was finally, fully himself. The Vances, meanwhile, had found their new level. They had been forced to sell the mansion and its contents. They now lived in a respectable but unremarkable suburban house, the kind they once would have pitied. The fall had changed them. Eleanor and Julian were consumed by a quiet, simmering bitterness. But Richard, Liam had heard, was different. He had taken a simple consulting job, was home for dinner every night, and had started talking to his wife about things other than money. The final act took place in a sterile lawyer's office. Liam arrived first. Clara came a few minutes later. She was dressed simply in a dark sweater and slacks. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore no makeup. The transformation was startling. The absence of her expensive armor revealed a woman he barely recognized, one who looked more like the girl he'd first fallen in love with. The signing of the divorce papers was a quiet, somber affair. The lawyers spoke in hushed tones. When it was done, a profound and final silence fell between them. As they stood to leave, Clara turned to him. Her eyes were clear, without tears or anger. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice soft. "Genuinely, I've thought about it every day." Liam nodded. "What was it like?" she asked. "Growing up with that name, that incredible legacy, and keeping it hidden away? Why would you do that?" Liam considered the question, the first genuine one she had asked him in years. He gave her a genuine answer. "It wasn't a secret to be hidden, Clara. It was a responsibility to be earned," he explained. "My grandfather was terrified of what inherited wealth could do to a person's character. He'd seen it destroy families. He wanted me to build my own life, my own worth, on my own terms. He wanted me to become a man who was worthy of the legacy, not just one who was born into it." He paused, and his next words were the final, devastating truth that lay at the heart of their entire story. "And he wanted me to find a partner who would love me. Just me. Liam, the quiet architect who likes to build things with his hands. Not Sterling, the heir." The unspoken part of his sentence hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp as glass. "And you failed the test." She finally understood. It wasn't a secret he had kept from her. It was a test he had presented to her, and she had failed it at every turn for 3 years. A deep, shuddering sigh escaped her. It was the sound of a final, painful acceptance. "He must have been an amazing man," she whispered. "He was," Liam said simply. He offered a small, sad smile. "Goodbye, Clara." "Goodbye, Liam." He walked out of the office and into the bright afternoon sun, feeling not the joy of victory, but the solemn peace of a necessary ending. He was free. The study was exactly as he remembered it from his childhood. It smelled of old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco, though his grandfather hadn't smoked in 20 years. It was a room built of dark oak and stories, the walls lined with thousands of books, not for decoration, but for reading. Blueprints were stacked in corners, and geological maps of the county were framed on the walls. It was the heart of his grandfather's world, and now it was Liam's. He walked across the worn Persian rug, his footsteps silent. The evening light slanted through the large bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden ghosts. This room was his inheritance, more so than any stock portfolio or property deed. It was an inheritance of purpose. He went to the massive oak desk that dominated the room. His fingers traced the intricate carvings on its side, a pattern he had memorized as a boy. From his pocket, he took the key, the heavy, ornate brass key he had carried for so long. It wasn't a symbolic affectation, it was real. He knelt down and inserted it into a hidden keyhole near the floor, concealed within the desk's ornate base. With a soft, satisfying click, a hidden drawer sprang open from the side of the desk pedestal. Inside, there was only one object, a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his grandfather's elegant, sloping script. It was not a diary of events, but a record of thoughts, a ledger of philosophies. Liam opened it to the last entry, written just a month before Arthur Sterling had passed away. "I have given the boy the tools," he read, "but he must build the house himself. I have given him a map, but he must walk the road himself. Wealth is a test of character, and a name is a burden of responsibility. It can be a fortress that protects a man from the world, making him weak and complacent, or it can be a foundation upon which he builds a life of substance. I pray I have taught him to be a builder. I pray he finds a partner who loves the architect, not the architecture. For true worth is not what you own or what you are called. It is the quiet integrity of your choices, the silent strength of your character, and the kindness you show to those who can do nothing for you. That is the only legacy that endures." Liam closed the journal, a profound sense of peace settling over him. His grandfather had trusted him. He had trusted him to walk the road, to build the house, to become a man worthy of the legacy. The ordeal with Clara and her family hadn't been a tragedy. It had been the final, brutal test of that journey, and he had passed. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city below. The lights were coming on, a glittering constellation of human endeavor. He could see the spire of the building his company had designed, the distant glow of the museum his grandmother had endowed, and the faint outline of the cranes over the new community he was building. It wasn't a city he owned. It was a city he belonged to, a city he had a duty to serve. He felt not the weight of a great name, but the lightness of a clear purpose. The Vances had taught him a painful but valuable lesson about the hollowness of a life built on appearances. In the end, they had given him a gift, the freedom to be exactly the man his grandfather had hoped he would become, a man of substance, a builder, a Sterling, not just in name, but in character. Have you ever felt underestimated, only to find a strength you never knew you had? What do you believe is the true measure of a person's worth? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of quiet strength and poetic justice resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. We have many more stories to share about the hidden powers we all carry inside us, waiting for the right moment to be revealed.